husband, Brian, will be charged with a crime. CBS News correspondent Christian Benavides is following developments from Freeport in the Bahamas. Christian, what more can you tell us about these text messages?
Michael, good morning. These messages show that Lynette was confiding in a friend back in 2024 about issues in her marriage, telling that friend that they had, quote, called it quits before getting back together.
Social media videos and photos posted by Lynette and Brian Hooker in 2024 show the couple happily living and sailing together. But just weeks earlier, Lynette told a friend their marriage was over in messages obtained exclusively by CBS News. In late 2024, Lynette told Marnie Stevenson, a fellow boater, "I guess it was just too much closeness. We decided to call it quits." When pressed if the two could reconcile, Lynette told her friend, "Not this time. It was real bad. I can't be out there with him." But within a month, the two appeared to be back together.
We knew that there were problems.
Lynette's daughter, Carly Aylesworth, said Brian's story about what happened the night her mom disappeared doesn't add up.
I wish he wasn't detained. Like, I really hope that this was an accident, but I just feel like a moment of anger from him has done something where he can't undo it.
Brian told police his wife fell overboard from their 8-foot dinghy during a nighttime ride on April 4th. He repeated a similar story to the Stevensons in a phone call last week. They recorded that call.
She basically just bounced off the dinghy in the middle of a little blow.
These maps with drawings from Brian may provide the most detailed account of what he says happened that night. The 59-year-old told friends he shared the images with boaters and law enforcement to help search and rescue teams. Brian was arrested by police Wednesday and has gone through several hours-long interviews, according to his attorney.
He was questioned in relation to causing harm, which resulted in her death, but we have no evidence that any body has been recovered.
His attorney tells me that police here have requested another interview with him today. They have until 7 o'clock tonight to decide whether to charge him or let him go. He has denied all wrongdoing and currently is detained without facing any charges. Michael?
All right, Christian Benavides, thank you.
On a dark stretch of water in the Bahamas, a woman disappeared between two islands during what should have been a short dinghy ride back to a sailboat. Her husband said she fell overboard. He said rough water, wind, darkness, and a dead engine turned everything into a nightmare within seconds. By the time he reached shore and called for help, Lynette Hooker was gone. Days later, the search shifted from rescue to recovery. Then her husband was taken into custody for questioning, and what first sounded like a tragic accident became something much more troubling. An active criminal investigation with no public answer yet about what really happened on that water that night. Authorities have said Lynette, 55, vanished near the Abaco Islands on April 4, 2026, after her husband Brian Hooker reported that she fell from their dinghy while traveling from Hopetown toward Elbow Cay. He has denied wrongdoing and no public court finding has established what happened. But with family members openly doubting the accident narrative, older allegations from the relationship resurfacing, and investigators in both the Bahamas and the US treating the case with unusual seriousness, one question now hangs over everything. Was this a terrible accident at sea or the beginning of a very different kind of case? Stay with this case all the way through because the deeper you go into Lynette Hooker's disappearance, the less simple it becomes. Before she became the center of a national missing person mystery, Lynette Hooker was a woman whose life had moved in a dramatic direction. The public reporting describes her as a Michigan woman who had embraced a sailing lifestyle with her husband, Brian Hooker. Together, they had presented a version of life that many people dream about, leaving behind routines on land, living on the water, moving from place to place, chasing freedom and sunlight, and a kind of reinvention that looks beautiful from the outside. It is part of why this case hit so hard. Disappearances are always painful, But when a case begins in a setting that looks like paradise, it unsettles people in a different way. It suggests that danger does not always arrive with warning. Sometimes it appears in the middle of a life that, from a distance, seems almost enviable. But beneath that image, public reporting indicates the marriage may have been under strain long before Lynette vanished. But that distinction matters, because in real cases like this, background is not proof, it is context, and context can shape how investigators approach timelines, statements, and contradictions. Family members, especially Lynette's daughter Carly Aylesworth, have publicly questioned whether the disappearance was simply an accident. She has described the relationship as turbulent and has said she wanted a thorough investigation rather than a quick assumption that rough water alone explained what happened. Reuters and the Associated Press both reported that relatives were skeptical of the overboard account almost immediately. That skepticism grew when older reports and personal accounts began resurfacing. Media coverage this week has highlighted prior conflict in the relationship, including reported text messages from 2024 in which Lynette allegedly told a friend that she and Brian had called it quits during a prior separation and that she did not want to be out at sea with him. Those messages have been described in secondary coverage and are part of the public narrative now, but they have not been presented by authorities as proof of criminal conduct on April 4, 2026. They do, however, add emotional gravity. If Lynette had previously expressed fear or hesitation about being alone with Brian on the water, that naturally changes how people hear his version of events. There is another layer too. A 2015 domestic incident in Michigan has resurfaced in news reports. According to reporting based on a police report, both Lynette and Brian accused each other of assault during that earlier dispute. Some outlets reported that Brian had visible injuries and that Lynette was arrested, but the matter was not pursued because there was insufficient evidence to determine who started the altercation. That episode does not tell us what happened in the Bahamas. It does not establish guilt, but it does show that the relationship had a documented history of conflict serious enough to draw police attention. For investigators, history does not solve a case, it sharpens the questions. And that is where the emotional center of this case begins to take shape. Lynette is not just a headline, she is a mother, she is a daughter, she is a woman whose family is now trying to understand whether her final moments were the result of chaotic weather, bad luck, and a catastrophic accident, or whether something far more disturbing happened on a dark patch of sea with only one other person there to tell the story. Her mother has spoken publicly. Her daughter has spoken publicly. Neither appears willing to accept an easy answer without evidence. According to police and reporting from Reuters and AP, the basic account from Brian Hooker is this. The couple were traveling by dinghy between Hopetown and Elbow Cay on the night of April 4th when Lynette fell overboard. He said she had the engine key or kill switch lanyard with her, disabling the boat, and that strong currents and wind carried her away. He then paddled to shore and reported her missing. On paper, the explanation is simple. On the water, in darkness, it may even sound plausible to some experienced boaters, especially under poor conditions. But in cases like this, our plausibility is only the beginning. Investigators still have to test every detail. Was the route ordinary? Were conditions truly that severe? Why were they out at that hour? What exactly happened in the seconds before she went into the water? And what, if anything, can corroborate the only available first-hand account? Those questions intensified because the early search produced so little. A flotation device was reportedly recovered, but Lynette was not. Authorities eventually shifted from search and rescue to recovery. That is a brutal transition in any case. It means hope changes shape. The goal is no longer to find someone alive. It becomes finding answers, evidence, and, if possible, a body. That moment alone changed the tone of this case. Meet what began as an emergency on the water was now something investigators could not treat as routine. Then came the development that pushed this story into national true crime territory. Bahamian police arrested Brian Hooker for questioning. Reuters reported that he was detained based on probable cause for further inquiry, while AP reported that the US Coast Guard had opened a criminal investigation. Those are serious developments, not proof, not a verdict, but serious. Authorities do not transform an overboard report into an international criminal investigation without reasons they consider significant, even if those reasons have not yet been publicly disclosed. Brian, through attorney Terrell Butler, has denied wrongdoing and said he is cooperating. Public statements attributed to him described the incident as a tragic accident involving unpredictable seas and high winds. That defense is important because any responsible account of this case has to hold two truths at once. One, that the circumstances are suspicious enough to warrant scrutiny, and two, that suspicion is not the same as proof. As of now, the public still does not know whether this case will end in charges, release, or some other turn entirely. And that is exactly why the next part matters so much, because once you start laying the timeline out carefully, hour by hour, the case stops feeling like a broad mystery and starts becoming a series of very specific, very uncomfortable questions. The timeline in this case is both simple and deeply unsettling. According to Bahamian authorities, Lynette Hooker disappeared on the night of April 4th, 2026, during a dinghy trip near the Abaco Islands. Her husband said they were traveling from Hopetown toward Elbow Cay when she fell overboard. He reportedly told police that she had the keys or kill switch attached, which caused the dinghy to lose power after she went into the water. He then said wind and current separated them, leaving him unable to retrieve her before eventually paddling to shore to report what happened. That is the central account around which everything else now turns. At first glance, the story hinges on the environment: darkness, water conditions, current, visibility, and the vulnerability of anyone thrown into the sea at night. Some reporting has suggested there was no moonlight and that the conditions were poor enough to make a recovery difficult even in the best circumstances. One rescuer quoted in People described the event as involving a lot of bad decisions and suggested alcohol may have been a factor, though that has not been publicly established by investigators as a formal finding. That detail is important because it shows how quickly the early narrative split into two broad possibilities. On one side, a cascade of maritime mistakes ending in tragedy. On the other, a suspicious event disguised as one. Then the early investigation began, and that is where the case took a darker turn. The Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and the US Coast Guard all became involved in the search. That level of response reflects how serious the initial report was. Public reporting says the operation covered air and sea efforts before shifting into recovery mode. Only a flotation device was publicly reported as recovered. No body, no public explanation tying the physical evidence neatly to the husband's account, no closure for the family, just an expanding search area and a growing sense that something in the case was not sitting right. From an investigative standpoint, the most important evidence in a case like this is often not dramatic. It is procedural. It is the route, the tide, the timing, the distance between where the fall supposedly happened and where Brian says he came ashore. It is the physical setup of the dinghy. It is whether the key or kill switch explanation matches the boat. It is how long he was on the water. And it is whether his account remained consistent from one interview to the next. None of that has been fully disclosed publicly. But the fact that police detained him for questioning and extended that detention strongly suggests that investigators believe they needed more time to test or challenge critical parts of the account. That is where one of the biggest unresolved issues in the case appears: corroboration. As of now, public reporting does not show that authorities have released any independent evidence confirming exactly how Lynette went into the water. There is no public surveillance clip, no released witness statement from someone who saw the fall, and no public forensic summary that closes the gap. That absence does not prove foul play, but it creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, every contradiction becomes more important. Every prior allegation becomes more relevant. Every unexplained choice on that night becomes a subject of scrutiny. Family members have focused on exactly that. Lynette's daughter has publicly said she has trouble believing the overboard explanation as a complete answer, pointing to her mother's boating experience and the couple's history of conflict. Public reporting also indicates that friends and relatives question practical details, including whether Lynette would ordinarily have been the one handling the dinghy in the way Brian described. These points remain part of public debate, not official findings, but they show why the case caught fire so quickly online and in the media. The story is not just tragic, it is contested. Then there is Brian's own public posture. Before and around the period of his detention, public reporting says he publicly described himself as heartbroken and maintained that the event was an accident. His attorney has consistently said he denies wrongdoing and has cooperated with police. More recent reporting says his custody was extended while police prepared additional questioning and weighed whether to release him or pursue charges. That procedural moment is crucial. It tells us the investigation had not stabilized. Authorities still saw unanswered questions. Yet at the same time, no formal public charge had been announced in the reporting reviewed here. That tension defines this entire case: serious suspicion without public resolution. And when you look at the broader evidence picture, 4 elements keep resurfacing. First, the overboard account itself. Investigators care because it is the core event. If it is accurate, the case may be a tragic maritime accident. If key parts of it do not hold up, the entire case changes. Second, the search results. The recovery of a flotation device, but not Lynette, leaves open multiple possibilities and gives investigators very little publicly visible closure. It also keeps the timeline exposed to challenge. Third, the relationship history. Prior conflict, resurfaced messages, family concerns, and the 2015 domestic incident all matter, because investigators in real cases routinely examine whether a disappearance happened in the context of coercion, violence, or escalating instability. None of that proves what happened here, but it may affect how investigators assess motive, credibility, and risk. Fourth, the criminal investigation posture itself. The US Coast Guard opening a criminal investigation, together with Bahamian police detaining Brian for questioning, is one of the strongest indicators that officials did not see this as a simple, closed accident file. And yet, for all of that, one thing remains stubbornly missing: public certainty. Not certainty about weather, not certainty about relationship strain, not certainty about suspicion, certainty about what actually happened in those final moments. That is what makes this case so gripping. Everything circles the same point, but nothing lands cleanly on it. A woman disappeared at sea. A husband gave an account. Family members challenged it. Investigators escalated the case. And the most important answer is still somewhere out there, either in unreleased evidence in future interviews, in forensic findings not yet public, or in waters that have not yet given up the truth. And in Chapter 3, that is where the case becomes even more difficult, because Once you examine the competing theories side by side, you start to see why this story has become more than a disappearance. It has become a test of how we interpret uncertainty itself. There are two main ways people are looking at Lynette Hooker's disappearance, and both deserve to be handled carefully. The first theory is the accident theory. This is the version closest to Brian Hooker's account. In this reading, Lynette fell overboard during a nighttime dinghy trip in poor conditions, taking the engine key or safety mechanism with her, and the boat lost power at exactly the worst possible moment. Darkness, wind, and current then made a rescue impossible. Supporters of this theory point to the hazards of boating at night, at the possibility of rapid disorientation on open water, and the absence of a public charge despite intense scrutiny. Some early coverage quoted rescuers describing the circumstances as reckless or shaped by bad decisions rather than necessarily criminal intent. Brian's attorney has also emphasized his grief, cooperation, and denial of wrongdoing. What supports that theory is straightforward. Accidents at sea do happen, even to experienced people. Water at night is unforgiving. A few seconds can become fatal. A person can disappear quickly, especially in current. The lack of a recovered body and the lack of publicly released forensic findings also mean the public does not yet have evidence disproving the accident scenario. But what weakens that theory is just as important. The family's skepticism did not emerge out of nowhere. It emerged from prior relationship concerns, old reports of domestic conflict, and messages that suggest Lynette had, at least at one point, serious fears or frustrations related to Brian and life at sea with him. Add to that the fact that police detained him, extended his custody, and that the US Coast Guard opened a criminal investigation, and the accident theory stops sounding like an obvious answer. It may still be true, but it is no longer simple. The second theory is foul play. This is the theory many observers, including some family members, fear may be at the center of the case. In this reading, Lynette did not simply fall overboard in a tragic accident. Instead, something happened during that dinghy trip, and the overboard account may not fully explain it. People who lean toward this theory often point to the timing, the lack of corroboration, the couple's reported prior tensions, the resurfaced 2024 texts, and the seriousness of the criminal investigation. They also note that in many real cases, alleged accidents become homicide investigations only after inconsistencies, prior violence, or other concerns begin to accumulate. What supports that theory is the pattern of suspicion, not a publicly announced smoking gun. Authorities took the husband into custody for questioning. That matters. Family members immediately doubted the story. That matters too. Reported history of conflict matters. But what weakens the foul play theory, at least publicly, is the same issue that complicates everything in this case. The public has not yet seen definitive evidence. No murder charge has been publicly announced in the reporting reviewed here. No court has found Brian responsible for any crime, and responsible storytelling has to stop there. Anything beyond that becomes speculation. There is also a broader issue here that gives this case unusual emotional force. Cases like Lynette Hooker's often sit at the crossroads of two public realities: the danger of online overreach and the danger of dismissing warning signs too quickly. On one hand, the internet can turn suspicion into certainty before evidence is public. On the other, families in missing person cases often know relationship dynamics outsiders do not. When daughters, mothers, and close friends say something feels wrong, investigators cannot ignore that. So the challenge becomes balance. Take concern seriously without converting allegation into fact. This case is a near-perfect example of why that balance matters. It also raises questions about domestic conflict, isolation, and life lived far from quick help. The couple's sailing lifestyle may have offered freedom, but it also meant periods of intense proximity and, at times, geographic isolation. If there was conflict in the relationship, the water would not create that conflict, but it could magnify vulnerability. Again, that is not a conclusion about guilt. It is a reminder that setting matters. A short trip on land is one thing. A nighttime ride between islands is another. At sea, there are fewer witnesses, fewer cameras, fewer immediate interventions, and fewer chances to reconstruct a moment once it has passed. And that is why this case continues to command attention, not because it is sensational, because it is unresolved in the most painful possible way. A woman is missing. Her loved ones do not have her back. The last person known to be with her denies wrongdoing. Investigators are signaling concern without yet giving the public a final answer. That combination creates a story that resists closure at every turn. For now, what remains is a set of hard truths. Lynette Hooker disappeared on April 4, 2026, in the Bahamas. Search efforts shifted into recovery. Brian Hooker was arrested for questioning and has denied wrongdoing through counsel. Family members have publicly challenged the idea that this was simply an accident. The US Coast Guard opened a criminal investigation, and as of the latest reporting reviewed here, the public still does not know what authorities believe they can prove. That uncertainty is the emotional core of this case, because every hour that passes without Lynette being found makes the absence heavier. Every unanswered question sharpens the next. Every theory keeps colliding with the same reality. Only one version of that night can be true. Lynette Hooker is more than the mystery around her disappearance. She is a person whose family is still waiting for answers, and that matters more than any theory. Whether this case ends as a tragic accident, a criminal prosecution, or something even more complicated, the central fact remains the same. A woman vanished at sea, and the truth about her final moments still has not been publicly resolved. That is why this case deserves attention. Not reckless attention, careful attention, the kind that respects evidence, respects uncertainty, and refuses to treat rumor like proof. If you have followed this case, comment with the theory you think investigators are testing most closely right now. Share this video so more people can follow the facts as they develop. And subscribe for more true crime documentaries that stay intense, responsible, and grounded. If anyone watching has credible information relevant to Lynette Hooker's disappearance, the right place for that information is law enforcement, not the comment section.